let me explain to you why I'm so frustrated with private equity right now. I know you came for the new MiHoYo game, but like, just kidding. We're actually gonna talk about like economics. Um, so, wait, I hope there's nothing incriminating in here. That's probably fine. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about these economics really quick. I'm very frustrated with how things have been kind of going lately. I'm sure like a lot of you have been feeling that way, just because like it's hard to get a job and like you're scared of losing your job. You're afraid of like, you know, losing it, and then like, you know, then you have to like kind of make up for it by finding some other position to fill, right? Like, so there's a lot of pressure on people to do well right now. So this is the little relationship chart that I made with private equity. So at the center of it, you got private equity, right? And these are the people that are investing in companies, right? And their whole ideal is to basically invest in companies and then make a return on like their profits, right? The government wants, you know, this mechanism to work well because, you know, a strong economy equals global power, and, you know, private equity basically influences the government through lobbying. The problem with that, though, is that a lot of times they just straight up lie, and they're like, hey, actually, Mr. Government, like, I think it's a really good idea to invest more in oil. Like, we should, you know, we'll just come up with clean oil. We'll just come up with, like, a recycling program, even though, like, plastic is horrible and, like, really, you can't recycle it. You know, we're just gonna push for, like, you know, these programs that don't actually work. So a lot of times these private equity, like, companies just end up, like, kind of having free reign over whatever they want to do because they lie to the government, and the government wants to kind of, like, be a doormat for them, right? So then you have the employers, these are the companies, and the idea is private equity gives them funding to get their company started or to grow in, like, you know, a way that they wouldn't be able to without that kind of like injection of money. And then they make money off of the return on investment. I talked about that. And then down here you have us, where we make a salary and we work, and we don't own the products of our labor. We just have to, you know, do work for them and we get a salary. In some ways, people prefer it because it's more consistent, but it's also very exploitive because you end up having a lot of the money that the employers make go to these private equity firms. They go to the CEOs who make like a ridiculous amount of money compared to the employees. It's not very good. So this is why I'm a big proponent of co-ops. It's hard to get funding for co-ops because a lot of these like private equity firms don't want to give you funding, but I think co-ops overall are more sustainable, and like they won't get you rich quick, but I think co-ops are really, really good. So if you see a co-op to work for, go for the co-ops, honestly. That, and through lobbying and regulation, they stifle free market competition, driving up prices and reducing the quality of services. So yes, there are situations though where free markets actually don't work. And a perfect example of that is healthcare, which we have on the side here. So healthcare, normally like in a free market situation, you'd be able to like shop around for healthcare. You'd be able to be like, oh, okay, well this doctor will do this for less money and for better quality, so I'll go with this healthcare provider. The problem is that it doesn't work that way because typically you have to pick whoever your insurance will cover. And then on top of that, if you have an emergency, you don't have the chance to really, you can't like negotiate that, right? Like you have to get it taken care of. So regardless, like that's why the healthcare industry, at least in the US, is largely so expensive, is because it's kind of treated as a free market. And yeah, it's horrible. As someone who works in healthcare, heck yeah, the free market doesn't quite work very well. Yeah, exactly. And what's happening actually a lot, and Kaiser, I'm sure you've seen this, maybe not necessarily in your practice, but in others, or hospital or wherever you work. A lot of these private equity firms, they are they are slurping up medical stuff because they realize that a lot of these tech companies, right? You invest in the tech companies and like now there aren't any of these like big exits anymore. And so it's harder to get money, to make money off of these like tech companies as this like get rich quick scheme. So now they're focusing on two things, healthcare and real estate. And you want to know why? Because people have no choice. They have to buy healthcare, they have to buy real estate. Otherwise they die or go homeless, right? So that's kind of like what's kind of happening in this current economy. They're going after healthcare. They're going after, well, okay, they're going after healthcare. They're trying to squeeze as much profit out of them as possible. So they're buying up these practices that are typically privately owned. Maybe they're cooperatives, maybe they're owned by like the actual doctor itself, right? So that would be kind of like a self-owned business, small business. But what they're doing is they're laying people off. They're trying to like scam the insurance companies to like charge as much as possible. And so as a result, people get worse healthcare, you know, for basically the same amount of money. It's awful. I've seen this in nursing homes. I've seen this in like, you know, other places. It's fucked. And then over here you have real estate. Real estate's a whole different story because they're actually working with the real estate agencies now too. So what they're doing is they're buying up these properties in these like rich areas. Hang on, what do you say? Billing is such a joke? Yeah, exactly. You just bill for like the maximum amount you can. So I remember they were like billing, I'm not gonna name the practice, but like there was a practice that was like doing group, like they were working with people in a group, but then they were billing each person as like an individual one-on-one session because they can charge more that way. Before the private equity firm took it over, it was individualized, but now it's you get like group sessions instead of like individual one-on-one sessions. It's stupid. So these private equity companies like have no interest in employees. They have no interest in like the common person. And like I said, like they're completely unchecked by the government right now because of this whole relationship, right? Don't get me wrong, I agree this shit situation needs to be addressed. This isn't happening in a free market with a low barrier to entry. Both healthcare and real estate are the most regulated markets. Healthcare is regulated in the sense that like you can't fuck up too badly, right? Like, but there still is what I'm getting at, like you can't fuck up too badly, right? Like you still have to give like some baseline level of care, otherwise you'll get sued. But the problem still is that like a lot of these private equity firms are trying to like optimize the hell out of things, and it's resulting in people getting like worse care for the same amount of money. That's the problem. And like a lot of it honestly, like having talked with like a lot of healthcare workers, like it gets in the way of them wanting to like give the best, you know, service that they can to people. These are people who went into healthcare often not for the money, but because they wanted to like help people, and you know, they were profitable before, they're profitable now, but like it's not the same kind of relationship that they want. And again, like free market economics does not work in situations where you have no choice. You have to buy healthcare, right? You can shop around, sure, but if you go to the ER, there's no free market mechanism to prevent somebody from like charging you like $3,000 for a ambulance trip and like, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for treatment, right? So again, in that situation, free markets don't really work, and there's no regulation to stop people from doing that. Okay, so back to real estate, right? What's happening with real estate is wow, I went on such a long tangent with this. I'm so sorry for anybody who came for the game, but whatever. This is more important. So the thing with real estate is also this is gonna go on YouTube later, I think. The thing with real estate is that you have you basically building a building costs around the same amount, right? You could either build luxury housing or affordable housing. It's basically the same thing. The only difference is the appliances and, like, you know, the quality of cabinetry. Very negligible compared to the actual building itself. So all these real estate, you know, private equity firms that want the biggest return on their value will want to build the luxury apartments so that they can charge more for it. And so it ends up in this situation where, like, they're buying up these old properties, they're tearing them down, they're building a new building, making it like a luxury condo unit, and then selling them to, like, high salary workers for, like, crazy amounts of money. And in certain cities, like the Bay Area, where, like, all this private equity is, like, being dumped into tech companies, and people can afford these, like, $3,000, $3,500 a month studio apartments. You know, it's really disrupting the market and pushing people out. Like, there's so many artists that had to, like, just pack up and go. A lot of the lesbians are moving out to Oakland because, like, women tend to make less money than men, and so, like, you know, they can't afford San Francisco anymore. And so so what's happened recently is that borrowing has become more expensive. So in order to combat inflation, the Federal Reserve has increased the percentage of, like, interest rates on loans to banks, which in turn gets passed on to anybody loaning out money. Anybody. And so at the same time, people are spending less too, right? And big exits aren't happening with these tech companies anymore. So at least in the Bay Area, what's happening is private equity was dumping ridiculous amounts of money into these tech companies in the Bay Area. You'd have, like, and you'd have, like, companies that made 0 cents to give funding to, like Juicero, right? Like, who the fuck thought this was a good idea? But these, like, investment firms are kind of stupid, and they'll just be like, oh, well, you know, like, maybe it'll work out. Maybe there is a chance it'll work out. They're not thinking smart. They're just like, no, we need to get the next big exit. We need to make money fast. Those exits haven't been happening as much lately. And also, borrowing from the government has gotten more expensive because of those interest rates, right? So now, these private equity firms, they originally pumped all this money into tech, and they're like, oh, we need to, like, train up all these, like, tech employees. We need all these, like, engineers. There's a shortage. We need so many of them. And so now there's a huge number of employees on the market, right? There's all these startups that, like, they don't really make sense, but they're still somehow getting funding, and they're failing, right, over and over. But then the private equity, they were like, well, maybe it's okay, because maybe they'll be the next big, like, Airbnb or Uber or whatever. What's been happening lately is private equity has been pulling out because it's costs more money to borrow, right? And so now there's less startups, there's less, like, companies around, right? And then the employees are getting shafted, not just in tech, but in other sectors too. So, you know, there was that, like, website, what is it, layoffs.fyi? Yeah, there's this website here, and a lot of tech jobs, like, have been basically drying up, right? So you'll have like all these people. So when a layoff happens, not only is that, like, somebody now on the job market, but that's also one less job. So it counts twice, right? It's ridiculous. And since COVID-19, there have been so many layoffs. Like, this is basically the population of San Francisco. Like, it's insane. Maybe bigger. Okay, hang on, sorry. The main thing that decides what build is zoning laws. There are very few mixed-use development zones approved, and it's either residential or commercial with no mixed use. Yeah, I agree. Mixed-use housing would be really, really good, especially for preventing traffic. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems in LA. The other thing in LA is, like, the zoning laws require, like, parking and all this crazy shit. There's so many good YouTube videos about that. But yeah, like zoning's also kind of fucked. The way that they're regulating that isn't very good. If you want to like fix the housing market, you have to decommodify housing. So that means that like private equity can't see it as something that they can just plunder, right? So then you turn it into like you turn it into basically like its value alone as its ability to like house somebody, and not necessarily like as a commodity to be speculated on. So you can do things like rent control, which the Bay Area does quite a bit. They could be doing it more, but they don't really do it that much. You can build more housing, but again, because what we were saying before with like, private equity wants to get like the biggest returns, so they're going to like build high-end housing and hope that like they can fill it, once the bubble picks back up again from like, the employers and like all these tech companies and stuff, right? But I think generally the way to kind of like equalize housing is like make sure the supply and demand problem is handled, sure, but also ensure that like you're maximizing the rights that renters have. You have to have like good case for like eviction laws, and making sure people can't just be displaced because you want to build a higher value building, guaranteed representation in courts if for whatever reason you have to go to court against your landlord, stuff like that. I think Do Not Eat 1 has a really, really good video about it where he plays some city game while talking over it, and like he talks a lot about housing and gentrification. Very good video. I recommend that a lot. Mixed zoning gives freedom to developers to make denser housing where it's needed. Yeah, absolutely. Denser housing is really good. That's actually one problem that's very unique to the Bay Area, is that we have a big NIMBY problem where like a lot of people don't want to change the character of the Bay Area, and so they actually require like there's a lot of laws around having to get approval from everybody nearby in order to like build a new building and things. It could be you could turn it down as simple as like, oh, well, my sunlight would be affected if this high-rise building would be, built in front of my house. And it's like, okay, come on. Like, sure, your sunlight is important, your views are important, but also like we have a real housing crisis. But then the NIMBYs are kind of incentivized to keep things the status quo because that actually increases their the value of their house, right? Which means that they can sell it for more, which again, the more you commodify housing, the more it becomes a problem with dealing with NIMBYs, which is why I'm such a big proponent of decommodifying housing, making it so that its value is only how much its ability to house people is and nothing more, right? No speculation about like the jobs and the value and everything. A lot of what would be 20-unit affordable apartment gets denied because they would ruin the skyline. Exactly, you get it. Okay, so what was I talking about? Oh yeah, so with these employers, there's going to be less of them because private equity is pulling out of this area, especially in the Bay Area. Less of these these venture capital places are investing in startups. And so not only does that affect the people in tech, but it affects everybody like supporting those workers, right? It affects the restaurant owners. It affects, janitorial and custodians, right? It affects all of these kind of entry-level positions that people can use to kind of like support themselves with like little training or whatever, and they end up basically they're the first to be affected, right? Because they have the least capital to work with. They're the less mobile of the people involved in this situation, and so they kind of end up on these like welfare situations because like that's all that they can do, right? If you can't find a job, you have to apply for unemployment, and like that sucks, right? And I've been there, right? So this is not me like poor shaming anybody. This is me saying like I completely understand your situation. It sucks being in that position. And then the tech employees are also being hit now. That's the new novel situation now, where like now these like very highly paid, highly skilled people are also having a hard time finding a job. And it feels really awful, right? And I think that's why people are starting to kind of like really see the boiling point of this situation, is like it's actually starting to affect like the upper class, which, you know, it shouldn't have to get to that point, honestly, but like it's making it very, very visible. And now you'll start seeing it being talked about on MSNBC and all the liberal, you know, places. And, you know, I'm talking about like the tech and the tech bubble in like the Bay Area as just a specific example. I'm sure there are other industries where this is happening. I'm sure like investment, this is happening in, like any kind of like B2B type stuff. Like I'm sure lawyers are probably being affected to some degree. I don't know, maybe not, but like I wouldn't be surprised if this was this is why basically our whole system is broken, right? It's private equity is like all at the center of it, and I really don't think that like this financial institution is solving things. So then what do we do about it? I think we need to kind of, if this whole system isn't working, we need to sidestep it. We need to make a new alternative. This is what we call in anarchist organizing spaces dual power. So dual power, right? And we're going to make a more democratized investment. Hang on, I gotta fix this. So we're going to democratize investment. Instead of these private equity companies, you know, with their billions of dollars investing in Juicero, we should really democratize how we invest in companies and what we choose is important and what's not. The problem is that that is a very difficult problem to figure out, right? If you can make some kind of solution to this, you're going to be really, 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 really rich. But that's not easy. So I think this is like the solution to all of this mess. Democratized investment. Maybe instead of having like traditional employers, you have like co-ops. Something like that. Co-ops are basically worker-owned employers, right? Instead of like having somebody privately own the business, you know, your boss, right? You have a co-op where it's owned by all the employees. So the co-ops are both employees and employers at the same time. So co-ops are super cool. But I think you're kind of getting the trend is that we kind of create this alternative system that's more equitable, that like helps everybody, and it makes it easy for like people to kind of like actually have their voices heard through like a direct democracy kind of thing. So that is my plan. That is what I think, you know, needs to be done to solve this whole system. And it's not going to be easy to figure out, but I'm thinking about it. And I hope you are thinking about it a little bit more now too. So hell yeah, educate. Okay, good. I'm glad that the people want to hear this stuff. I thought I was just being a weird nerd when I think about all of these power structures and stuff. But yeah, I think until we can figure out how to get to this, the best thing that you can do is get involved with your local governments. I think federal and state government, really hard to influence, but like local government, they can actually get quite a bit of leverage. And then once you get involved with your local government, they can start passing these laws that regulate real estate. You know, you can basically have a law that says like, you are not allowed to charge more than this amount for rent, and you can only increase it by this % every year. That's what rent control is. Right now we have this in the Bay Area, but it's very selective depending on where you live, and it's usually only for historical houses, right? But we can do this, you know, and we can also like push back against what all of the NIMBYs are kind of pushing for, right? And I think the majority of people in the Bay Area probably rent. I don't think they really own their homes. So there's more of us. If we just get involved with government, we can totally like topple this down. We agree on the nature of the problem, but I think it'd be much easier to restrict the overreach of the government that allows the cycle of corruption. I mean, I agree to some degree. But I don't think we're going to like tear down the government and turn it into like a libertarian, you know, state anytime soon. So I think the best way that the federal government does overreach, sure, it's not great. They do a lot of dumb things that like benefit private equity and like big corporations. But the best start that we can have is like local government, right? I think that's the best way. And then in the meantime, we just build up this dual power. And that way, like, we can just sidestep this whole nightmare and just work directly with the government, right? Eventually, if like this starts to like gain enough traction, then this doesn't matter, right? We've created an alternative that's more equitable to like everybody involved. So yeah, I mean that's my opinion at least. This is like my opinion on like, you know, the whole political system. And full disclaimer, I am an anarcho-communist. I'm not a libertarian. I do believe that like, you know, maybe some level of government does have to exist, but like we should be minimizing it as much as possible, and we should make things equitable and communal and, you know, benefiting everybody. I'm not a big fan of the Xi Jinping style, you know, CCP stuff. Like, don't get me wrong. I felt better with trying to work with local government, TBH, a little more responsive. Yeah, absolutely. Local government's where it's at. It's where like you have the most influence. And then the thing is, like with local government, that can actually trickle up to state government, which is what you end up seeing with like, you know, California and its laws and stuff. And then California, like, our laws are very influential across the country. So eventually those will spread to like places like New York. And then like if a lot of the blue states end up like catching them on, then it can influence federal laws. So yeah, that's my little rant about why I'm so pissed off with private equity and the situation right now with employment. And why it's been so hard to get a job right now. It's brutal out there, and now you know why. Maybe the real Zenless Zone Zero was the horrible zoning laws and medical insurance companies we made along the way. Exactly. You get it. Okay, after that rant, I need to take a sip of water. Hang on. So anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I know you weren't expecting a gay vampire VTuber to talk about the intricacies of our modern institutions, but here we are. And I hope you feel educated and smarter and more informed, and you can make change in the world, and you don't feel despaired that, like, you know, it's all gonna crumble down and we're all going to die. It's okay. We can solve this together. Anyway, anime girls. No one can say I didn't learn anything by watching VTubers. Hell yeah. Yeah, we're not just stupid, dumb anime girls that make comments about being lewd and shit. We're smart too, sometimes. Well, I once bamboozled by Hatsune Miku into learning calculus, so it's not completely out of the blue. Oh, that might be good future content ideas, yeah. I can talk about like organizing too. Organizing is a very interesting topic that I don't know a lot about, but I want to learn more about. So maybe once I kind of dive more into that content, I'll share what I learn. I think I lost like half the people on Twitch just ranting about that, but I don't care. It was worth it. They might have also just been going to bed and didn't want to like listen to my schizo talking, right? So I don't know.
物のことなんてなんかあったっけ？お兄ちゃん覚えてる？
ちょっとお店の評判を落とすようなこと言ってるって自覚ある？